Over the course of our years studying youth culture here at CPYU, there are a host of films that have offered us helpful peeks into the adolescent experience. One of the most provocative of those films is 1985's The Breakfast Club. As the 40th anniversary of the film is coming up, it's amazing how well the film still captures the realities of teenage life. Today, I chat with a couple of youth workers about how The Breakfast Club is still very moving and in many ways timeless on this episode of Youth Culture Matters.
From the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, this is Youth Culture Matters. If you're a parent, youth worker, educator, counselor, grandparent, or anyone else who cares about kids, we're glad you've joined us for this practical, informative, and hope-filled podcast. This is a place where together we talk and think Christianly about the rapidly changing world of today's children, teens, and young adults.
Well, welcome to Youth Culture Matters, everybody. I'm Walt Mueller here at the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, and today we're going to talk about an anniversary, or it's a conversation about something that was precipitated by an anniversary, something that we just celebrated 40 years back just a few weeks ago on March 24th, perhaps the most famous high school detention of all time. Saturday, March 24th, 1984, the detention at Shermer High School in Shermer, Illinois. And you are probably familiar with this if you're familiar with the film that dropped in February of 1985, a classic film now. Some said it's the quintessential 1980s film about teenagers, and that's the film we're talking about here today is The Breakfast Club. And I'm going to tell you that I love talking about this film. I watch it every year. It's a habit I have, or practice I have, to watch it annually just because of, to me, how moving it is. I watched it again last night in prep for this recording we're doing today. And I told Chris Wagner when I came in, once again, I cried like a baby when I watched The Breakfast Club. That's just an issue I have with certain films. So it's the great John Hughes film. John Hughes, of course, famous for other films, one of which makes me cry every year as well, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and numerous other films that he's done, teen films. But this one is probably the one that might be most well-known and most watched. So we're going to have a conversation about this today. I've invited three of our CPYU research fellows in for the conversation. One, unfortunately, had to back out at the last minute because of some family things that came up. That's Carrie Trumfio, so she won't be with us today. We're just going to say she's in detention. I know she's doing other things, but we're also excited to have Brett Weyerbaugh and Tim McAlpine here as they've watched the film and they've agreed to come in. Yeah, let's talk about it. What's changed? What's stayed the same? Are there things we can learn from this? Any applications we can make in youth for youth ministry? Are there things that this film can open our eyes to, sensitize us to as we shape our ministries to kids and come to an understanding of what it's like to be a teenager? So, Brett, welcome. Tim, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
thanks.
I'm glad you guys are here, and I know you both watched the film. So before we start, I want to ask you about what age you were. Where were you in your life on March 24th, 1984? And I think, Tim, you said that you weren't even cognizant of what was going on, right?
No, I would have been 2 years old living in Regina, Saskatchewan.
Okay, so 2 years old and in Regina, so there's not much, not much going on there. But so when did you first watch the film?
Oh, it would have been actually in my early 20s before I actually watched it. So it's been 20 years since I've watched it, and then as recently as last night, just like you.
Yeah. When you first watched it, were you doing ministry at that point, or?
No, I was in school for it.
Okay, and a question about when you first watched it. How did the film hit you? Is there anything memorable or significant about that, or was it just watching another movie?
No, I think for me, where I was at on my emotional maturity journey, I really didn't appreciate Mr. Vernon and the principal, and could empathize very much with Bender to a degree, I think.
Yeah. And by the way, let's jump into this just to go a step further. tell everybody what you're doing now. Yeah, I'm guessing in many ways you are Mr. Vernon.
Well, in some ways, yes. I
Yeah.
work at a Christian school as the director of faith formation, so I spend most of my days hanging out with junior high students.
Yeah. All right. So you've been on both sides of this. And Brett, you're doing youth ministry out in Ohio, and you were how old when the film came out?
Well, 1 second, I need this to answer the question. So hold on 1 second.
Oh, so you guys can't.
Okay.
You guys can't see what I'm seeing because you're just hearing if you're listening to the podcast. But Brett just hopped up from his desk and put his varsity jacket on.
And I'm actually a little disturbed at how tight it is.
Yeah.
So.
But you got it on. That's a great thing. And it says, yeah, so you graduated
I would have been 15 or 16, sophomore in high school when it came out. And I remember it being instrumental in just feeling like it's what I was experiencing as far as, all the different cliques and having to navigate all the positives and negatives of that. And I just remember feeling like it got me. It understood that I had, that everybody has these insecurities. Everybody wants to be accepted. Everybody's struggling with their identity, as I was at the time. So it really did impact me back then.
Yeah. And so what prompted this for me is, of course, my annual viewing of it, the fact that we just had this 40th anniversary of the fictional Detention, and the fact that next year, this coming year in 2025, on February 15th, that'll be 40 years since the film came out, and I'm always interested in how films hold up. But something else prompted this as well, and I thought, you know what, let's do this now, and that is that a story broke recently that Molly Ringwald, who's now 56 years old, and she plays Claire in the film, was recently asked on this anniversary of the Detention about, how does she think the film holds up? She says that she does not like watching herself on film. You know who else was like that? John Candy, I think. He didn't like to watch himself on film. But when she did watch it, she says, you know what, there really is a lot that I love about the movie, but there are elements that haven't aged well. And to get specific, and we'll get into this, she said, like Judd Nelson's character, John Bender, who essentially sexually harasses my character. And that made me think about, hey, we need to do a podcast on this to see what holds up, what doesn't, what's changed, have been good changes, what's not changed, that sort of thing. So the premise of the film is that there are these 5 students who show up at school at 7 a.m. for, I believe, a 9-hour detention on a Saturday in March of 1984. And they're all from different groups. You guys mentioned a little bit about the cliques. It reminds you a little bit of, that scene in Mean Girls when she's brought into the cafeteria and she's shown, after years of being homeschooled, this is what the high school landscape is like, especially at lunchtime with all the different cliques. But here we have 5 students who have 5 very different backgrounds or in different groups, different cliques, but then over the course of the detention, how they sort of go at it with each other and then really start to bond over things that they hold in common. So we want to talk about this. So let's start with this. Let's talk about the characters themselves, because I think that's important. By the way, when they come in, they are basically instructed to write an essay. And the essay is to be about who you think you are, which that really kind of raised my eyebrows because I thought, the identity issue, right? And Mr. Vernon, who was mentioned already by Tim, is the one who was assigned. He's the disciplinarian who has to sit there all day in another room. And we'll get into that a little bit. But the essay they were asked to write, 1,000-word essay, who you think you are. And by the way, at the end, the essay was written by one person, and it never hit 1,000 words. So I was interested in how they were able to walk out of the school so easily after that.
I love, by the way, how there's a double meaning there where the principal is saying, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
And then they have to think about who are they.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Yeah. So, and this is, Brett, when you bring that up, this is one of the great things about this film. And I don't know, before we get into the characters here, you spark a thought. Like we were talking ahead of time. Every time I watch it, I forget how much profanity is in there. And I think in many ways it reflects the way kids like that would talk or be pressured into talking. I'm thinking specifically of one of the characters, Brian, who's kind of the nerdy brain, who perhaps does not talk like that all the time, but in the context of being in there and desiring to be accepted and to fit in, chooses, as a result of peer pressure, to talk like that. And so there's some fair warning there, on that. But it is in many ways, as these characters open up about their lives, it gets a little bit raw. So why don't we talk a little bit about the 5 different students and some of the observations we've had. And let's start with the ladies. Let's talk a little bit about Claire and who she represents in the teenage population. And this was Molly Ringwald's character, who we cited her just a minute ago. So anybody want to give a little bit of an overview of Claire, and then the rest of us can chime in?
Well, I would say she's kind of the entitled one that gets her way all the time. I think it was early on in her car when she says to her dad, "Can't you get me out of this?" implying that he probably has gotten her out of other things. So she's the princess. She's the goody two shoes, the popular one, the prom queen, if you will, type character.
Yeah. So there's right there, as you said that, about her dad getting her out of things. I think about what we've been reading about coddling, helicopter parents, parents who don't let their kids suffer the consequences of their actions. So we have an example of that right there. And then also playing her parents one against the other. And, it comes out later in the film that her parents aren't obviously on the same page, but she's there. Do you remember what she was there for? I don't remember why she got sent to detention. Skipping school for shopping. And so she, here's this entitled thing. And so she does fit that stereotype of kind of a princess. So yeah, she's and she plays Claire Standish, the popular girl, and she is just completely obsessed with appearance, popularity, maintaining image, that sort of thing. Which, by the way, can you imagine? Let's just think, because this is one of the things we talked about that we noticed is not present in the film, and that is because it takes place in 1984. There's no social media, there's no smartphones, there's no computer technology, although I did notice that Mr. Verna was looking at one of those massive computer printouts that had the holes down the side of the paper that existed back then. But can you let's just talk a little bit about how do you think Claire's personality would function as you work with students in today's world with social media and technology?
Well, yeah, I think she would be one that, you can see the consistencies with kids today. For me, Claire, the best was when you could tell she'd not been insulted very often, and she'd not been, there's certain people in life that you can tell perhaps have never taken a punch, and then the first time that they do, it's quite a shock to them. And I think the expectation of individuals like this with their social media is they're going to just grow this following, that what they have to say is far more important than what other people have to say. They have an opinion on a certain style, certain food, and it's, in today's world, it's fascinating to watch what people think others care about. And I can see a character like Claire consistently posting about herself from what, borderline narcissistic perspective. And yet at the same time, it wouldn't shock me to see many people follow along and give her an authoritative voice in their life just based on her social status and socioeconomic class. And I think there are individuals that have her type of personality that, for whatever reason, our culture enjoys to follow and enjoys to listen to.
Yeah, so for kids today who have a bent, a background and a bent like Claire would have, our world today, it really is fertile ground for those bents, that leaning into yourself. And I like the way you pointed out narcissism. it would really feed that. It would just amplify that in so many ways. Have either of you, do you sense that as you're working with students, you run into Claire from time to time?
Yes, we're a private school, so yes.
Okay. Yeah. Brett, what about you? We're not asking for names here. I mean, we're just talking about the general teenage population.
Well, and actually, I see this with students in just getting involved in the youth ministry here, where they see themselves in a sense above everybody else. So they won't, kind of grace the events with their presence unless they approve of the people who might be there. I can think of a couple of girls in particular who, when given a personal invitation to something, inevitably their question is next, who's going to be there?
Yeah.
Because that affects whether they're coming or not. It reminds me of, Claire, when she sees everybody for the first time in detention, says, wait, this is a mistake. I don't belong here.
Yeah.
So that vibe, I get that from certain individuals quite a bit, actually.
Yeah.
But I think, to piggyback off that, Brett, the comment of "I don't belong here" was solely based on the class of people that were with her, and it wasn't even. I shouldn't be here. Like the consequence for my action. This is too great. It solely is. I don't want to be associated with these individuals.
Well, and it was their appearance too. She didn't know them. She just knew what they looked like and what they looked like they came from. So,
yeah. I think one of the other things about Claire that, and I tune in to the parental influence, which will come out, later in our discussion in terms of what home life is for everyone. But, she, as the movie unfolds, you begin to see, well, even when they pull up in the car, with their dad, that she's a pawn in her parents' game as they're going after each other and on the verge of divorce. And I just think about, what we've learned since 1984 about divorce. I think about Judith Wallerstein and her book on the unexpected legacy of divorce, where kids, she believed going into this that kids were resilient. Over the course of a year or 2 years, they would be able to bounce back from a divorce. No, she found it to be the exact opposite, that these kids grow up to have all of the social problems that we would list. If we were listing the social problems and the pressures that teens face, we would see that children of divorce, children of brokenness, experience those things at a greater rate and a greater depth. It really is, harmful. And so I think there, just as you think about her, and probably everybody at the school looked at her and thought she had everything together. All her peers, she holds it all together. If she was on social media, it would be the same thing. But behind the scene, as you both said, she starts to break down when you get through that mask or that shell that's on her. So, yeah, really, you know what? She probably, when I think about the 5 students who are in that detention, she is the one who seems the most shallow, but the depth of her hurt and pain is pretty doggone harsh. It runs deep. So, yeah. Let's go to the next gal who, her character cracks me up a little bit. This is Ali Sheedy as Allison Reynolds, who, it's very interesting, when she arrives, she's the last one to arrive for the detention. And I don't know if you noticed, but just the way she navigates to her seat, she avoids everyone. She takes a wide turn around the back, and she chooses to be away from everybody else. And is a fascinating character from start to finish. And one of the things I'm going to say about her is I don't think it was till like 33 or 34 minutes into the film that she even had a line. And even then it was, very short. But she's a fascinating character as well. So any thoughts about her and what you learned about her as the movie unfolds?
Well, I'll add, too, the way she arrived. She gets out of the car and kind of moves forward as if to tell her parent or whoever's driving or something, and they kind of screech away.
Yeah, and a Cadillac. They were in a Cadillac, so there's some money there.
Yeah, And so there was, you see her being ignored right off the bat. And her line, she's the one who said that her home life is unsatisfying, which is kind of maybe underselling a little.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to see how everybody's reply was, everyone's home life is unsatisfying.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything you picked up on, Tim? Yeah, Tim.
I thought it was interesting, even the way, she's accused of not speaking. She kind of makes that squeaking noise at the beginning of it, like she's laughing at things going on, and even her physical appearance, in the transition that takes place there when she has the makeover. But I find it fascinating when students hide their face, with whether it's with hair or whether it's hat, hood, whatever, and the fact that her character has that longing for love and comfort from parents she's not receiving at home. But I mean, I think her character initially comes across as though I'm going to try to be this mysterious artist who, and even her interaction with what is Emilio's character's name?
Oh, Andrew.
Andrew in the hallway when, he's asking what's your poison, in the context asking what kind of pop do you want? She's like, vodka, like trying to this edgy, kind of dark, but really coming from a place of deep hurt and neglect from home.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. She doesn't want to be talked to. She wants to be left alone. She wants to be a loner. And yet when the conversations come up, like you said, she's quick to tell great big lies that would attract attention to herself. So that she's very complicated in that way.
Yeah. And by the way, what the reason why she was there, which comes out, she didn't do anything, right? She said, I'm here because I didn't have anything better to do. And so you're thinking to yourself, okay, here's someone who's not connected at home. There's no desire to stay at home. And I think you picked up on the fact that when the car pulls away, that spoke very, very loudly. And she comes in and just is not connected with anybody, but deeply desires that, it's that longing we have that God's created in us for relationships with others. So she steals things. The fact that her purse was filled with all kinds of stuff. We didn't get to see everything that was in there, which she says she's saving for whenever she decides to, to run away from home. I mean, it's just, it's like a ship without a rudder, without a sail, and the wind's just blowing her all over the place, and you just feel, so badly for her. But I will say, and Tim, you kind of jumped ahead to the front of to the back end of the film there, from the front end, and that is that as these kids start to bond over the course of the 9 hours, Molly Ringwald's Claire decides to, basically give her a makeover, and when she comes out of that makeover, the transformation is unbelievable. She looks like a completely different person. And she is very quirky. I do want to say, we're going to get to the lunch in a few minutes, but I loved her love for Captain Crunch. I just have to say that made her, that's my favorite cereal. So we'll come back to that in a little bit, but a complex character. Yeah. So, hey, we've probably hit the break time. So we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we're going to continue talking about the Breakfast Club. We just had that 40-year anniversary of the fictional Detention on a Saturday. The film is coming up on 40 years out, and in so many ways, it is just I don't know. It's educational still. It offers insight into the lives of our kids, some of the things they're dealing with. And I'll say this: I just think, as someone involved in ministry, as a dad, as a grandfather, it's made me cry. And it's made me cry because you see the brokenness in kids' lives, and you want so desperately for them to experience, wholeness in Jesus Christ. And so we'll come back. We'll continue talking about how the Breakfast Club can make us aware of what's happening in the lives of our students. Stick with us.
If you enjoy listening to Youth Culture Matters and would like to support the ongoing efforts of this ministry, you can do so by visiting cpyu.org/giving to make a donation. Your prayers and financial support make this podcast possible.
Well, welcome back, everybody, and we're having a conversation here about the 1985 John Hughes film, The Breakfast Club. And here's an interesting thing. I was not aware of this, but I was doing a little more research on the film, and it seems like people still are talking about this movie as we are today. And one of the things that came up was that there was a different title for the film when John Hughes first made it. His original title for the film was The Lunch Bunch, and probably because they all ate their lunch while they were in this 9-hour detention on a Saturday. But John Hughes had a friend from another school, this is someone he knew, who had a detention class that he called the Breakfast Club, and he decided to go with that. I know I asked you guys at the opening how old you were, and it's fascinating, Brett, that you were right at the age when this thing came out. I was actually 24 years old, and I was just finishing up my residential time at seminary. I'd been in youth ministry for a while. I was coming back out, and in the summer of '85, shortly after the film came out, I landed down in Philly doing youth ministry in a suburban context. And I think that's one reason why this film, touched me in so many ways, because in both of my youth ministry settings to that point in time, I could name kids who were in my ministry who were like the different characters. Like, I would look at these 5 characters and just think of specific kids for each one. And it wasn't just one kid for each one, but multiple kids going, yeah, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so. And so it really gave me, just basically an hour and a half of watching the film. It gave me some insight into who they are. And one of the things I want to say is that early on in the youth ministry world, at least this was true for me, and I think it was for many of my peers back in the day, we were not savvy in terms of understanding human brokenness beyond just, sinful behavior and the need for redemption in Christ. We were not savvy as to what people's stories and their backgrounds, how that shaped or misshaped them. We would just see kids as kids as kids as kids, and it's always important to know the stories, because once you get to know the stories, and each one has an individual story, there were things, because of sin, there were things happening in their life that should not be happening, and this is true for all of us, but especially for our kids as we think about ministry to them. So there were things that are happening in their lives that should not be happening, and there are things that are not happening in their lives that should be happening. And as we start to get to know what those things are, and I often say for each of your students, get a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, and a column for each of those. Here's what's happening that shouldn't be happening. Here's what's not happening that should be. And when you start to look at those lists, the longer the list, the greater the needs of these kids, and the greater sensitivity you'll start to develop in very intentional ways as you start to think about their brokenness. So we talked before the break about 2 of the characters that were in there, Claire and Allison. Let's go now to the guys, and let's start with Andrew. Let's talk about Andrew. And Andrew Clark, it was played by Emilio Estevez. And so let's talk a little bit about him. Do you remember why he was in detention?
To impress his dad.
Yeah.
It tells you what his dad's like. If to impress his dad, he taped the guy's backside together.
Yeah. And it was just this spontaneous moment that he describes where he, eventually gets to the point in the film, like when they're dancing around each other, but when things start to break down and they've had a little bit of, John Bender's marijuana to smoke, walls come down and they start to all talk about why they're there. And this guy, Andrew, is heavily influenced by the jock culture. His dad is pushing him. The pressure is unbelievable, to get a scholarship, to get a ride. And it's over time, you just start to see that this is what's driving this kid. And he tries to impress his friends in the locker room by jumping on this unsuspecting kid who's weak and skinny and, basically, doing what Brett said, humiliating this kid. And I want to come back to that a little bit later as they start to break down on what we learn about feelings and things. Anything else about Andrew that jumped out at you in terms of thinking about your students or his story?
I think that is fascinating how he seemed to play the role of a bit of a protector early on, and a desire to stand up for Claire, whatever his motive was in that initially, outside of continually wanting to exert his physical strength and make sure that, from what it appeared, that Claire felt safe. And I thought that was an interesting characteristic for me, that there was something in him that was not okay with the way that John was speaking to Claire.
Yeah, so he spoke up as a protector. What about, I'm thinking about him and his relationship to his dad, and it comes out that he is really a project and not a person. He's someone that his dad is working to live through vicariously, which we see a lot with parents today. So we've got that pressure, right? There's that pressure there to achieve athletically. And when we talk here at CPYU about the unrealistic pressure that we place on our kids, athletic pressure is certainly one of them. I think about David Elkind, and when he was talking really just 2 years after the film came out, when he was writing in 1987, he was a professor up at Tufts, and he was very concerned about the pressure we're putting on our kids. He had books like The Hurried Child and All Grown Up and No Place to Go. He would say, what kids need is a time to grow, so just let them be kids. What we give them is, this unrealistic pressure, and what results is stress and its aftermath. We saw that, right? How did we see the stress? As you guys were watching Andrew's character, how did you see his stress come out over the course of the film?
That's a good question. I think the stress from his parents came out. I even think in his physical aggression towards John. I think the way in which he seemed to have an extreme response to those situations, to me, demonstrated that he was under a great deal of pressure. But
yeah, go ahead, Brett.
Well, I was just going to say that he does let loose at the end. He does something that probably an athlete who was interested in a college scholarship maybe wouldn't do, which is, get high and just completely let loose. And then the other thing was he risks getting another Saturday detention and missing a meet. Really, it seems like it was, just kind of off the cuff, like, I don't care, I'm just going to do this and risk it. When they were escaping the library and walking around, they were concerned for him that he would get a detention on Saturday, and his lack of concern for that almost made me think that he was rebelling against his dad's desire, his dad's and mom's, it sounds like, pushing him so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, we overlook it, but he said about his mom in the car that she's already reamed him out. So it wasn't just dad.
Yeah, I was thinking about, you brought this to mind about his aggression, and when he he broke his own rules and risked a lot by smoking the pot. When he's up on that balcony in the library where the detention's being held and he lets loose, it's like a pressure cooker that just explodes. I mean, the anger and it was all pent up, and you could just tell he's holding this in, and you think about this. The other thing I thought about Andrew was early on when he was going at it with John Bender, who we'll get to in just a couple of minutes, who really is, man, that character. But when he's talking to Bender, he tells Bender, Bender, you don't count. You don't count. No one would notice if you disappeared. And just the way that we use our words and the attitudes we have towards different people, it's amazing and pretty strong. Let's go to, we're talking about Bender. Let's talk about Bender, John Bender, who this character is actually played by, was Judd Nelson, right? So who played John Bender. And he is basically portrayed as kind of the typical slacker kid who was sentenced for the detention for pulling the fire alarm. He's seen as a criminal. That's the way that Mr. Vernon is the one. He goes after Bender consistently. I mean, these two almost come to blows. And Vernon, dares him to come to blows. But everybody is basically saying to John Bender, you are a valueless human being. And I'll just be honest, growing up and going through high school in the 1970s, I thought of kids that I knew in high school we had John Benders in the school. They looked like John Bender, they acted like John Bender, they talked like John Bender, and we just didn't know the story. So, yeah, talk a little bit about Bender and his character.
Well, I mean, I think the anger that continually comes through, the fear that's masked by apathy, and seeing, there's a number of scenes actually with him that really did break my heart, and the one in particular where, Vernon's got him basically locked in a closet, and yeah, as you mentioned, challenging him to fight him, and you can just see the fear. It's almost as though there's a reaction that this is not something that's abnormal to him. This is not a new experience for him to have an older man come at him physically. And just to see, for me in that moment, you actually saw the little boy who's afraid. And then in front of his peers, the consistent, apathetic, I don't care attitude. Good, go ahead, give me another detention. That's fine. To me, it just exploits so much of his hurt. And I thought, his little monologue with the conversation between him and his dad, just, that's
that's the one that hits the hardest, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I would add that, throughout he's wearing all these layers, protecting himself from other people. He's constantly insulting everybody. Over the top insulting and, pretending like he doesn't care. And then I love that, when they're caught in the hallway, he kind of steps up and says, you know what, I'm going to take the fall for everybody. I'm going to get caught. You guys go back. And I just love that, he doesn't care. He doesn't care. And then all of a sudden he's really worried about them. He doesn't want them getting into trouble.
And that's part of it.
Even that.
Go ahead, Tim.
Well, no, I was going to just add that there's a when there's a lack of care at home, there's a lack of concern for consequence with students. When mom and dad don't care at home, and I see that a lot, where I don't care, it doesn't matter, because there's nothing instilled in them that a loving parent has consequence to help instill different, whether it be biblical Christian values or even just, hey, let's be a decent human being values. When those aren't present, then there's a lack of concern for consequence. But at the same time, I loved that part, because to me that just showed his genuine care for others, contrary to what he's displayed up to that point.
Yeah, and let's go back to that, like you said, that monologue there where, he's asked by Andrew, what's your family life like? And what's it like at your house? And he says, you want to know what it's like at my house? That scene, he really goes off. He gets into this conversation that he has with his dad where he plays both roles, and then the role of his mother, just pouring it on. And he is lost in that. He is not even in the room anymore when you watch him, because as he relives this thing, and his dad just pours it on about no good, on and on and on and on. And then his mother adds to what his dad piled on. And then he just flips And that's when he jumps up, and he throws, he's destroying things, and he jumps up, he gets up on the balcony, and when the camera comes in on him and on his face, and he's still lost in his hurt and in his pain and his anger. You guys notice the button that he's wearing? That it's just like lined up perfectly so the camera catches it, and the little
not saved.
Yeah, the button says "not saved," and that just, for someone in ministry or for a Christian parent, that is just hard hitting in so many different ways. This is one of the things I love about film, that you've got 90 minutes and you just get this lifetime in 90 minutes, and everything seems to have some kind of meaning in it. Yeah, this guy just not saved.
Can I add too that we all encounter students who have behavior problems, who lash out, who are rude and insensitive and so on, and it's easy to see, just to get angry with them, to get frustrated with them, and to write them off. But I love how his character, he shows up, there's no parent, he's the only one without a parent dropping him off.
Right, he walks.
To walk. He's the only one without a lunch, and during the course of the lunchtime, he's ridiculing everyone, insulting everyone about their lunches. But what's really going on is, I think he's hurt that he doesn't have a parent dropping him off. He doesn't have anybody providing him with a lunch, and it's all it's all a reflection of the hurt that's inside of him. And I think that's important for us to remember when we encounter kids like that. Yeah. That there's more to the story than them just being idiots.
So much of that comes out behaviorally, and I go back to conversations I have with youth workers where they're asking about disciplinary issues and kids who are consistently causing disciplinary problems and derailing the youth group, being a distraction to others. And I got to the point where I started to think of myself in youth ministry, that the kids who are most disruptive are the kids who have the biggest holes and the deepest needs in their lives, the greater amount of brokenness. And so a very practical thing to think about here is, obviously you don't want to ruin it for everybody else, but if we can give special care and attention to those kids who are the behavioral issues, and rather than throwing them out or sending them home from the retreat, realizing this is where they need to be right now, and somehow finding ways to connect with them, to care for them, to maybe put some leaders one-on-one with them, to build a relationship with them in ways that draw them in, and then also tend to buffer the disruptive realities in our youth groups where, we're thinking, well, nobody else can listen because this guy's making too much noise, or this person's being way too distracting. These are deep and needy people, and they need to be there. And I think, too, when you look at the stratification in the film between the 5 characters, and this one obviously is the most disenfranchised outcast, just the kind of the quote-unquote loser in the film. How do we create in our kids a willingness to reach out to and minister to those students who have, great needs, rather than ostracizing them and saying, if you were gone, nobody would notice, right? Yeah. So, well, let's go to the last character here, and that's Brian. And Chris and I were talking here about Brian, who's played by Anthony Michael Hall, who is just this nerdy, straight A student, which we realize he doesn't actually have straight A's as we get into the film. And that's what is his undoing. He sees himself as a failure because he's not going to have straight A's, which is common for so many kids. It's interesting, though, that Anthony Michael Hall plays this character so well. It's great. And then you look at him later in life, and he's not this nerdy little guy anymore. As an actor, obviously he grew up and changed, but it's quite a transformation. But go ahead and talk a little bit about about Brian, and just this kid who's just desperately trying to fit in and is a complete outcast in this particular group.
Well, to me, it's the same as Andrew's situation, but just a different. Instead of sports, it's academics, because she's dropping him off, mom's dropping him off, and he's like, I can't study. They don't let you study at these detentions. And she says, well, you figure out a way to study. The pressure he's experiencing is very similar.
Yeah, and I think even in that, it exploits mom and dad's excuse me, not like their MO, their motive for what they're like. Your child is in detention for bringing a flare gun to school for an attempted suicide, and you're telling him to study more. And the pressure that I mean, that not only is there pressure for the academics, but to me, that you, mom and dad, love your reputation of me being smart more than you love me. And so for him to have that, to be carrying that, and then on top of that, you've got the social dynamic of not being able to fit in. And I mean, even it's hilarious when he's listing off the clubs that he's a part of, and you can tell the rest of them are just like, what? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But I couldn't get over why his reason for being there. And that interaction with his mom at the beginning was so telling as far as how mixed up their priorities really are.
Yeah. And go ahead, Brett.
Wasn't it his character? Remind me. It seemed to me it was his character by the end, while they're sitting around thinking about their own broken home lives and their own parents, faults and so on, that says, are we going to end up like our parents? I think it was him.
Yeah. Yeah, that was quite telling at the end, where they all were coming together and starting to see through, the differences in the masks that they all had, and starting to see, hey, these are human beings with real hurts and real pains. And now, as they're all talking about, brokenness with their parents, all their families being an absolute mess, then the reality is they start to look at, are we going to become just like them? I thought it was interesting when he got dropped off at school, the license plate on the front of the family car is Einstein's theory of relativity, which is quite appropriate for a family where there's a lot of academic pressure, right? EMC2. And, and Hughes puts those things in, these little signals of things, even the kinds of cars everybody drove, and like you said, or they walk, or how the parents interact or don't interact, and how they leave and then how they return. That whole thing is just so telling in so many ways. Anything else on Brian? All right. Well, let's. I want to ask two scenes. All right. I want to focus on two scenes here before we take another break, and then I want to come back and talk about, okay, how does this help us with our ministries? How does it spark us in our parenting? What should it tell us? Because I think it's such a great film, giving us insights and motivating us as well. And by the way, you would not get detention today for bringing a flare gun into school for an attempted suicide. I mean, you're gone, right? I mean, this is one way that the world has changed. So, but one of the things Brian said is I see me and I don't like what I see. I really don't. So let's talk about the lunches, and because I think that was really significant. And then let's talk about when they were sitting around and just really starting to let down. So the lunches first. Was there anything you noticed about the lunches which really gives some insight into the characters and who they are, and the pressures they're under and how they're trying to hold up under things?
Well, Andrew had the huge lunch.
Oh yeah.
Right. He needs a lot of calories to be a good wrestler or whatever, which didn't make sense because wrestlers are always trying to lose weight. But
right, they're cutting weight.
That's right.
Yeah, and his bag was like a clown car, right? Stuff just kept coming out of it, for his lunch, and they looked at that with wonder and awe. So, okay, so there he's eating based on the pressure that he has. So that was that. What about some of the others?
Claire's sushi was hilarious. Just what that kind of presented as far as what she eats. I actually thought, because like when Brian he doesn't even pull out his lunch. Bender starts pulling his lunch out for him, and you can just see, like, is this milk? Soup, in this nice little thermos, and everything's neat and organized, and you can, like, that guy.
A juice box. He had a juice box, yeah.
It's apple juice.
Yeah.
But the way, like, that lunch looked to me like a second grader's lunch that Mom would pack, and
PB&J with the crust, cut off. Yeah, yeah, it was brilliant. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
Allison, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Allison's lunch is, sugar, pixie sticks, Captain Crunch, and it seemed to me it was all about attention getting and trying to bring focus on herself, but also on her weirdness,
Yeah, and then even for Bender to go and make fun of Brian, which would deflect any sort of attention to the reality that he didn't have his lunch with him.
Yeah. By the way, just I'm thinking, okay, let's think 40 years ago and just get some perspective. Like, I know a lot of kids today. I mean, sushi's not an unusual thing for kids to eat today. You go into grocery stores, there's sushi places to go eat. When I was with those students back at the time that film came out, nobody was eating sushi. I mean, that was just a weird, odd thing. And so for her to have it at that time really was, that was pretty significant in the sense that, her trying to stand out and being different and, more highfalutin, if I can say that. Yeah. The other thing, by the way, I was going to ask you guys if you had ever had detentions. Did you guys ever have detentions when you were in school? Did you get detention? Oh, they're laughing. What did you get detention for, Brett?
A friend and I skipped lunch and a couple of periods just to go out to lunch. And so when we came back a couple hours later, of course, we were driving in as the athletic director was driving out. And so we got caught, and I had a Saturday that was the last that happened.
Yeah. Okay. That was the last, right? Yeah. Tim, you were shaking your head yes, as if you've got a notebook full of detentions.
Not necessarily a notebook. I would just, like, it started when we would have to give, like, oral tests and answer questions in French, and I would cheat for my friends and tell them the answers. And there's a couple times where they would rat me out, which always bothered me because I was like, I'm helping you. But there were, for me, it was always, I had a temper as a kid and would get in little scraps. Yeah. And I liked hanging out at school later. But they figured out detention wasn't a significant enough punishment, but they would take sport away from me.
Yeah.
And then,
yeah.
Hey, you're not going to participate in the volleyball game this week, or you're going to not be able to run a track, or whatever it was. Then I remember those ones stuck more than detention. Was kind of cool. It was a badge of honor at the time.
Yeah, and by the way, asking if anybody got a detention, that's a great icebreaker question for adults. All right, because you don't want to laugh and encourage it with your students, but to hear adult stories, especially if they're more refined now than they were when they were in high school, which most of us are. So I'll just share this. My last detention, the film reminds me of it. I won't tell the whole story, but when Allison takes her sandwich out and she gets rid of the meat that's on it, and she puts the pixie stick, sugar on there, and then piles the Captain Crunch on and then starts crunching away at it. When she throws that, it looked like olive loaf to me, or pimento loaf. It's like disgusting meat, bologna with all kinds of stuff in it. When she kind of flung that thing up and it stuck on the statue, that's actually what I got my last detention for, because I was with a group of guys. We were going 4 times a year down into Philly to Temple University. We were part of a research project that was being done on wrestlers, and I was actually in a control group of guys that weren't wrestling at the time but had played football, and we had to fast for the testing that they put us through, which is a tough thing for a high school kid. So when we were done, we were allowed to go out to the food trucks that were outside Temple University, and those Philly food trucks, and we would get 2-3 hoagies apiece and eat those things. And on the drive back to school, there was an extra hoagie, and of course that meant extra meat. And when you're driving down Broad Street in Philadelphia during a busy lunch hour and you see lots of people in suits walking, there's this great temptation to fling the meat like frisbees at these people. And my piece of meat landed on a guy's chest and stuck. And we thought it was hysterical till we got back and realized that the name of the school district was on the side of the bus, and the guy saw it. And so our AD came out, met the bus, got on, and said, "I'm not letting anybody off till I find out who flung that piece of meat at that guy, because you're in trouble, and you're also going to pay for his suit to be cleaned." And of course, I fessed up right away. There was no sense in trying to lie my way out of that one. But anyway, that was my last detention. But before we take a break, all right, that scene, they've smoked, they've kind of let down their their inhibitions, and they're sitting there and they're conversing. Anything you take away from that? Because that is, for me, tear-inducing. And every single one of them broke and cried. And I think you didn't see tears. I don't think you saw tears dripping out of Bender's eyes, but he was moved. Thoughts on that scene?
In the little research I did, it sounded like, and I'm not sure how much of it, but it sounded like a lot of that, if not all of it, was ad lib. They just had them talk with the cameras rolling. And if that is indeed the case, like, how impressive that these guys, these actors could, find that pain, within probably with their own experiences, and maybe their own experiences mirrored some of what they were explaining. But if that truly was the case, that it was ad lib, that makes it even more powerful to me.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think that scene in particular just exploited all the deep pain that they're all carrying, which is, thanks, Captain Obvious. But I think there's a number of things there that for me, Bender's always the guy that and not because I can relate necessarily to his actions or even home life by any stretch of the imagination, but more just this acting out in a rebellious spirit. But really, there's more going on inside. There's more hurt going on inside. There's more things being processed that a young guy can't articulate what they're thinking or what they're feeling. But I actually love the way in which that scene in particular just demonstrates, I think, a deep longing for community, but that all of these different individuals with their different backgrounds, with their different reasons for being there, are able to empathize with one another.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say, is that it's kind of culmination of them realizing that they're not alone, that everybody has a troubled home life, everybody has stuff that they're dealing with, everybody's going through hard things, and so their stereotype, the one track way of looking at each other is kind of shattered. And by the way, I don't know, I hope I'm not stealing any thunder here, but I was very confused at the beginning when the credits roll and then that glass shatters, and it opens up to Shermer High School. Like, that didn't seem to fit to me, and I wondered what the heck that was until later, when Andrew is doing his smoking and dancing and screaming, and the unrealistic shattering of that window happens. So obviously those two are connected. And I didn't realize this until I watched it again, that window, or I'm sorry, that door that shattered had written on it foreign language. I wonder if that has to do with, like, the languages that they didn't think they had anything in common is now being broken down, shattered.
That's good symbolism, Brett. That's good you picked up on that. And by the way, that thing that shattered in the beginning, I don't know if you saw what was written on there, but words from David Bowie, and it says this: "And these children that you spit on as they try to change their worlds are immune to your consultations. They're quite aware of what they're going through." And I found the music, Chris Wagner and I mentioned this to Chris this morning, the music was just so perfectly chosen, lyrically, as you think about it in the different scenes. But yeah, one comment before we break here, and that is in that, Brett, I'm glad you brought that up about, the ad lib, and I'm not sure exactly what happened there. But as I watched that, I would just encourage everyone, watch that scene and rewatch that scene. And Brian with his head down, just shielding his eyes as he listened to everybody. This is why I love this film. It's just, so insightful and helps us understand kids. And for me, the further I move away from my own adolescence, the more helpful a film like this is to spark those memories. So we're going to take another break. When we're going to come back, let's talk about applications. What have we learned from this? What should it spark us on to as we do ministry? How can it develop some sensitivities to us that result in some ministry strategies and approaches that will further the gospel in a world where these things are prevalent? Stick with us. We'll be right back. Hey there, Youth Culture Matters listeners. We've been told that one of our best-kept secrets here at CPYU is our one-minute daily podcast, Youth Culture Today. Each and every weekday, we release a new episode that's timely, practical, and hope-filled, all for an audience of parents, youth workers, and anyone else who cares about kids. Here's a sample from one of our recent Youth Culture Today episodes.
Youth Culture Today with Walt Mueller of the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding.
Parents, what are you teaching your kids about the presence of pain and suffering in their lives? Are you preparing them to face whatever difficulties life may bring by immersing themselves in what the Scriptures teach about the formative role adversity plays in our lives? In Psalm 119, verse 71, the psalmist writes, "My suffering was good for me, for it taught me to pay attention to your decrees." Theologian J.I. Packer writes these words about suffering. The fact is that God uses chronic pain and weakness, along with other sorts of affliction, as his chisel for sculpting our souls. Weakness deepens dependence on Christ for strength each day. The weaker we feel, the harder we lean. And the harder we lean, the stronger we grow spiritually, even while our bodies waste away. Those are good words that reflect the truths of Scripture that we must not only embrace for ourselves, but teach to our kids. The fact is, suffering is redemptive.
For more on youth culture, visit us on the web at cpyu.org.
Youth workers, do your parents a favor and get them to subscribe to Youth Culture Today, wherever they get their podcasts. Well, there's so much we can talk about. We could go on and on about this film, and the best recommendation I can give you is if you've watched it, watch it again. It's worth watching again, and keep a pen and a piece of paper there. If you're a parent, if you're involved in youth ministry, what can you learn about what to do, what not to do, what's going on with our kids, how to read the signals, those sorts of things. Youth workers, same thing. How do I need to be thinking about ministering? And that's what I want to talk about here, because Brett and Tim are both involved in face-to-face ministry with students. I'm thinking about the music. That's why I said that. The music in the film, I was looking at some of the lyrics again here during the break. But the face-to-face ministry that we have with students, how can this film really help and encourage us? Maybe make us aware, or make us aware again of things that we've forgotten. And so I want to talk about that. And I don't know if you guys have a list. Obviously, I have a list as well. Let me start. I'll give you one right away, and that is that I say to youth workers and parents all the time, there is this, as Blaise Pascal said, this God-shaped vacuum inside ourselves that we try to fill. And not only do we see it in the students as they're trying to figure out, what is this emptiness inside me? I was thinking a lot, I've been, earworms, I've been listening again to a lot of the music of Dave Matthews, and the song Gray Street is just haunting to me. I was listening to it again yesterday, and it's about someone who's depressed, and that line, there's an emptiness inside her, she'd do anything to fill it in. I mean, that captures the reality of this. By the way, when I was listening to that song, there's this point in that song where Dave Matthews just lets out this long, elongated cry. It reminded me a lot, as I was listening to it, of Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam's Jeremy years ago, which really was a song kind of about a guy maybe like John Bender, who's just experiencing tremendous amounts of brokenness. But that hole in the soul, that we can look in the eyes of all these kids, those who seem to have it together, but seem to have it together, but we know they're living into lies, or those whose lives seem to be falling apart. The common reality for all of them is that God-shaped vacuum inside that can only be filled by God. We know what they're yearning for. And I would go a step further and say one thing this film can do as well is let you see that the same thing exists for parents, especially when they're trying to have that hole in their soul filled by, living vicariously through their kids, or even, forgetting their kids because they're pursuing things that they shouldn't be pursuing and things are coming undone. So I think the great spiritual yearning and cry that's out there is so evident in this film. And so it's a good reminder that all humanity longs to be restored. It's that groaning for redemption that we read about in Romans 8. So what about you guys? Let's just kind of do this. I don't know what you have, but, just randomly, how is this helpful for us in ministry?
Yeah, well, I think for me, it was that the reminder to really not necessarily consider the behavior or see the behavior as a symptom more than an identity when dealing with difficult students in particular. I think it was a reminder for just the call to bear with one another. And there's this I think we forget it in our fast-paced culture, but we're actually called to exemplify like long suffering and patience and kindness and gentleness, even in correction. And I know for myself, I find when I see a behavior that I think is dumb or foolish or dangerous, I have a tendency to react, whether it be in anger or in fear, and try to correct the behavior. And I think, you listen to let's call them testimonies of these kids, and I couldn't help but just, like you, Walt, just desire to want to weep, and kids come to mind, and you can picture their faces and aware of their stories, and just thinking, once the movie does a great job of portraying, once that they feel heard, feel seen, and find that community, those guards come down, and those facades of anger and being a jock and being perfect, all those kind of things start to dwindle away. And I was just reminded the importance of taking time to listen to where our students are coming from and work to actually build that relationship where there's trust, that they're willing to share, which I don't think is something, I think we assume that at times in our positions. Well, I'm in a position where I'm a youth pastor in a church, or I'm working in a school. Kids are going to tell me stuff. Well, I think we need to in some way, shape, or form earn that relationship and trust.
Hey, before we go to Brett, I want to piggyback on that, Tim, because that's a good observation. One of the things that I had written down is that you see, obviously, in the film, the power of the group, the power of community when we're together to break things down. That presence breaks things down. Now, they had to figure out how to make that happen themselves, and it just sort of happened. But in our youth ministry settings, can we set it up where that happens? Can we create situations like I think about, initiative games and ropes courses and things like that, where students learn how to trust each other and talk through, issues of trust, and community starts to be built like that. And there's no reason why, and we've seen it happen over and over, that you can have multiple different types of kids with multiple different stories and multiple different issues and multiple different types of families of origin coming together and creating or being a part of a community that's bound in Christ. And that's what the church is. And so, I had a conversation with someone this week about cliques in youth group. And that happens. We tend, right, to gravitate towards those who are like us, or those who we like, or those who like us. And so what we need to do as leaders is go to those who have nobody connecting with them, and model that, and encourage our students to do the same, and watch what happens when those walls break down, and together we pursue what it means to follow Christ. So that was a good point. Yeah. Brett, what about you?
Well, I was struck by how anti-parent, anti-school, authority John Hughes, part of his message was, and I think in part that's why it's still even relative to kids today, because that's a time period where you're kind of feeling rebellious and against authority and so on. And in this, obviously in the movie, there was reasons for their parents, in a sense, were deserving of their disdain, and the vice principal was obviously not worthy of their respect. And so it just reminded me that, not all parents are like that. Not all administrators are like that. I know Tim's not, but
that's right.
But it does remind me that we have a unique opportunity to be the positive, authority figures, the positive role models. That if we can treat them in certain ways, if we can love them and walk beside them through their stuff, that we can, God could use that in their lives to point them to Jesus, to point them to His love, and so just the very clear disrespect that the authority figures rightly deserved in the movie reminded me of, that we can be different for our kids.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point, Brett. And I think that for the responsibility of us as parents, or those of us who are parents, to not be a reason our kids are getting angry, and a reason our kids are rebelling. And think of Paul's letters, like, parents, do not provoke your child to anger. And when I watch Vernon, get in his face and challenge Bender to hit him, not that I think parents might do it in that exact same way, but I do think there's a potential for us, if our ultimate goal is our kid is going to make us look good, I get to live vicariously through them, through their athletics, academics. They are not going to make me look bad because of the wealth I've accumulated, and I'm not going to let you feel the weight of any consequence, because that's what daddy does for you. All those types of things that actually can, in a different way, but kind of provoke our child the way I think Vernon provokes Bender in that movie. Go ahead and react, go ahead and get angry, go ahead and I think we have a responsibility to not provoke children. And for me, one of the biggest things that I've seen in my years of ministry, and my wife in particular, who works as an adolescent psychiatric nurse, when a home is broken and mom and dad use their child to pit them against one another, like you see that in the movie too, and it's just the consequences of that are devastating. And again, I think it's when we elevate our desire, reputation, our hope for whatever it is, and we want our kids to like us more than our ex, and we put our kids in the middle of this. It's the consequences I think are just so devastating, and very much like Vernon going, hey, go ahead and hit, like that type of provoking, we got to guard ourselves from. We got to take responsibility for that.
Yeah, one of the things I would say to that is, parents, don't be foolish. Just don't be foolish. I mean, let's think about this. You've got your kids. It's a high calling, high privilege, God ordained. You're a parent for a reason, and, our need to learn to parent well. And so one thing I would say to youth workers is, man, pour lots of time and effort into parent ministry. We've got some helps here at CPYU for that. So, and I know there's other things out there, but, pour yourself into parent ministry. Brett, you were going to say something?
Well, just similar thoughts, but I was struck with how it reminded me like of a prison camp movie. That it was so severe that Vernon was like the prison guard, and Bender's put in solitary confinement, and at the end, when he raises his arm, he's free from
Freedom.
this prison, and they're even behind bars in the hallway at one point, and I wonder if that was intentional on Hughes's part, but it reminds me that rightly or wrongly, some kids, that's the way they feel about their lives. They feel like they have no say. They're just they're a slave, whatever. They feel that they don't have a voice or anything, and we, rightly or wrongly, we need to give them that. We need to acknowledge that what they're experiencing is difficult and in some cases painful.
Yeah. This is really good. I love the conversation. I know we've gotten to the point where we need to come to an end. I'm going to say just a general catch-all here that appearances aren't necessarily accurate, right? We need to dig deep into the lives of our kids and see where their great needs are and bring the light of the gospel to bear on that. One last thing I'd say is I've recommended that youth workers and parents watch this film. Obviously some might push back and say, there's so much profanity, there's a little bit of sexual banter in there, things like that. In many ways, it's not gratuitous. In this film, those things are not gratuitous. Rather, they capture, in many ways, the reality of what life is like for our kids. And so if you can look past that, one of the recommendations I would make is perhaps if you're a youth worker, sit with your volunteers and watch the film and have a discussion like we just had here. I know that these guys have raised my awareness of certain things and prompted me to think more deeply about the film and how we do ministry here at CPYU, or when I'm face-to-face with my kids, or even just my time with my own grandkids. There is a sense of urgency out there, and our kids desperately need Christ. So Brett, thank you. I know we've got to cut this off. Thank you, Brett, for your input here, for giving it a look. Tim, same thing. And I'll just mention everybody, again, look at the film. There's other films by John Hughes that are very helpful. As we were talking here, I was thinking about Parents, right? Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I mean, what a ridiculous caricature of parents that sometimes people live up to. So parents, learn from this as we all will. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. I invite you to check out cpyu.org. We've got lots of resources on there. We're putting up parent prompts regularly. These guys are writing parent prompts along with the rest of our CPYU research fellows. There's a whole group of family table talk devotionals on there that you can use for nurture in your homes. And if you're at a church and you don't already get it, we want to invite you to go to our website and check out our monthly CPYU monthly parent page, which you can subscribe to and is a very helpful tool that you can use with parents to raise their awareness of what's happening in youth culture. So until the next episode of Youth Culture Matters, God bless you, and we pray that your ministries and your families thrive.
Thanks for joining us for Youth Culture Matters, a podcast from the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding. If you'd like to learn more about today's youth culture, visit our website at cpyu.org. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, email us at podcast@cpyu.org.